Leave now, you are embarrassing us, my mother hissed, adjusting her diamond necklace while my father grabbed my arm to escort me out of her $55,000 birthday party. I walked away calmly. Soon after, the venue coordinator approached their table. "The owner canceled your reservation," she announced. "You have 20 minutes to vacate." They had no idea I owned the entire waterfront estate. That night, I flew to my private villa in Santorini. My name is Sienna, 33 years old, and I spent my life being called the family failure. Before I tell you how I turned their ultimate humiliation into my sweetest victory, please let me know where you are watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members who underestimated you. Growing up in an affluent Chicago suburb meant appearances were everything. My mother Cynthia and father Gregory cared more about country club memberships than my well-being. While my younger sister Caroline demanded designer clothes, I preferred saving money. They constantly ridiculed my choices. They laughed and said I would be bankrupt within 6 months. The truth was entirely different. I spent the last decade relentlessly building a luxury real estate holding company. My business was now worth hundreds of millions. I owned properties globally, but kept my wealth hidden. I knew exactly how greedy my family was. I drove a reliable SUV and lived in quiet peace. My mother's 55th birthday party was supposed to be the social event of the season. The invitation demanded formal attire at the Azure Estate, an ultra-exclusive waterfront mansion renting for tens of thousands of dollars a night. I received a begrudging invitation, mostly so she could show me off as the struggling daughter. I pulled my dark gray SUV up to the grand entrance. The driveway was packed with Maseratis and Range Rovers. Valet attendants rushed around, opening doors for women in glittering gowns. I stepped out wearing a simple but flawlessly tailored navy blue silk dress. I wore no flashy jewelry, just a vintage silver watch. Before I could even hand my keys to the valet, a booming voice echoed across the driveway. "Well, look who finally decided to show up in the family minivan." I turned to see Devin, my brother-in-law, striding toward me with a smug grin. Devin was 31, an African-American man who always dressed like he had walked off a Wall Street movie set. He wore a sharp pinstripe suit, a heavy gold watch, and designer loafers. He was married to Caroline, and my parents adored him. Devin constantly bragged about his career as a high-profile hedge fund manager. Caroline trailed closely behind him, looking like a walking billboard for luxury brands. She wore a red sequined gown and carried a handbag covered in massive designer logos. "Sienna," Devin said loudly, making sure the arriving guests could hear him, "are you sure that old clunker can make it back down the driveway later?" "I am surprised it did not break down on the highway. It gets me from point A to point B just fine," I replied evenly, keeping my voice perfectly calm. Devin laughed a booming, theatrical sound. "Point A to point B is for people who lack ambition, Sienna. You need to upgrade your mindset. Look over there." He pointed a carefully manicured finger toward a gleaming, brand-new black Porsche parked prominently near the grand entrance. "I just picked that up for Caroline yesterday," he boasted. Cash. When you manage multi-million-dollar accounts like I do, dropping $100,000 on a car is just a Tuesday. You need to learn how money works, Sienna. Caroline smirked, linking her arm through Devin's. "You really should listen to him, Sienna. It is actually kind of sad watching you pull up to an estate like this in that tragic car. Mom was terrified you would embarrass us tonight." I looked quietly at the brand-new Porsche and then back at Devin. The irony was so thick I could practically taste it. They were standing on the driveway of an estate I owned outright, mocking me for driving a practical car. "If you ever want to get out of the rat race," Devin continued, lowering his voice to a pitying tone, "let me know. I could throw a few $100 into a beginner portfolio for you. Get you started on basic mutual funds. It is charity, really." That is very generous of you to offer financial advice, Devon, I said, maintaining my neutral expression. But I assure you, my finances are perfectly fine. Fine is the enemy of great, he shot back. That is exactly your problem, Sienna. You settle for a cheap life. This venue tonight cost me $50,000 to rent for your mother. I swiped my black card without blinking. That is what success looks like. You should really pay close attention to everything tonight. He gestured grandly toward the massive oak doors of the mansion. Come on, Caroline. Let us go mingle with the guests who actually matter. We cannot waste all night teaching basic economics to someone who refuses to learn. Devon and Caroline strutted away, leaving me standing with the valet. The young valet attendant looked at me with sympathetic eyes, having heard the entire humiliating exchange. Do not worry about them, miss, the valet whispered kindly as he took my keys. I think your car is great. I smiled at the young man, a genuine, warm smile. Thank you. Please park it somewhere safe. And do not worry about those two. They have absolutely no idea who they are talking to. I smoothed the skirt of my dark navy silk dress, took a deep breath of the crisp evening air, and walked toward the grand entrance of my very own house. The night was just beginning, and the foundation of their magnificent house of cards was already starting to crumble. I stepped through the double doors of the azure estate and let the warmth of the grand foyer wash over me. Waiters glided through the crowd carrying champagne. It was my property, my design, my vision brought to life. But tonight I was just a guest, an unwelcome one. I navigated through the designer gowns, searching for the guest of honor. I found my mother holding court near the staircase. Cynthia wore an emerald gown, her neck weighed down by a diamond necklace catching the light with every exaggerated laugh. She was surrounded by her country club friends, women who thrived on gossip. I approached holding a wrapped rectangular package. Mother, happy birthday, I said, keeping my tone polite. I extended my hand, but she offered no warm smile. Instead, her eyes raked over me, her expression souring. Her friends stopped talking, their eyes darting between us. Sienna, you actually came? She said, her voice dripping with condescension. And in that dress. I thought I made the dress code perfectly clear on the invitations. This is a black tie event, not casual Friday at whatever office you are working in today. My dress was custom-tailored silk, elegant and refined, but because it lacked sequins or a recognizable designer logo, to her, it was garbage. I dressed appropriately, Mother, I replied evenly. She scoffed, waving her champagne glass toward the room. Look around you, Sienna. Look at Caroline. Look at the wives of Devon's high-profile Wall Street partners. They understand how to present themselves. You look like you just wandered in off the street. You are embarrassing me in front of people who matter. I refused to let her words sting. I held out the wrapped package. I brought you a gift. I know how much you appreciate unique pieces. Cynthia snatched the package from my hands with a dramatic sigh. She tore away the premium wrapping paper without care, revealing a framed, original minimalist sketch by a highly sought-after contemporary European artist. It was a piece I had acquired at a private auction, valued at nearly $20,000. It was subtle, sophisticated, and entirely lost on her. She stared at the sketch, her face contorting in disgust. What on earth is this? She demanded, holding it up by two fingers as if it were contaminated. It is an original piece, I began, but she cut me off before I could explain its provenance or value. It looks like something a child drew in a notebook, she snapped. I am hosting a $50,000 party surrounded by elite investors, and my eldest daughter brings me a piece of cheap trash. She did not hand it back to me. She literally tossed it onto a nearby side table where the frame clattered against a large floral arrangement. I cannot believe you thought this was an appropriate gift. You always were so embarrassingly cheap. Her country club friends murmured in agreement, casting pitying glances my way. Cynthia turned to them, fully leaning into her role as the long-suffering mother. I apologize for her, Cynthia announced loudly, ensuring her voice carried to the neighboring groups. She has always been our struggling nobody. We try to help her, we really do, but she refuses to learn. She is a complete failure, and now she brings her terrible taste to my milestone birthday. It is exhausting having to explain her to my successful friends. Just then, Caroline appeared beside our mother, a smug smile plastered across her perfectly contoured face. Devin was right behind her, chest puffed out in his pinstripe suit. "Is she causing problems already, Mom?" Caroline asked, eyeing me up and down. "I told you we should have just left her off the guest list. She is just upset because she feels out of place," Cynthia sighed dramatically. "She brought me a cheap doodle for my birthday." Caroline laughed a high, mocking sound. "Seriously, Sienna, you should be grateful we even let you through the front doors." Devin paid $50,000 out of his own pocket to host this party. He wanted Mom to have the best of the best. The least you could do is show some respect and gratitude. Devin nodded solemnly, playing the part of the generous benefactor. "It is true. I swiped my card for this entire estate. I wanted to show you all how successful people live. You are standing in the middle of pure luxury, paid for by my hard work on Wall Street. You should take notes instead of bringing garbage gifts and embarrassing your mother. Look around. This is what wealth looks like." Caroline leaned in closer to me, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper meant only for my ears. "You are a toxic, jealous failure, Sienna. You cannot stand that Devin is a massive success while you are still struggling to pay rent. You came here tonight just to drag us down. You should be on your knees thanking my husband for letting you breathe the same air as his millionaire partners." I looked at Caroline, then at Devin, then at my mother. They were standing in my house, drinking my champagne, eating food prepared by my catering staff, and lecturing me about wealth and success. The sheer audacity was staggering. They were so convinced of their own superiority, so blinded by Devin's lies, that they could not see the reality staring them in the face. I did not yell, I did not cry. I simply looked at my mother and said, "I think you will find that sketch is worth more than the car Devin drove here in today. But if you do not want it, I will gladly take it back." Cynthia rolled her eyes, turning her back on me completely. "Get her out of my sight, Caroline. I cannot deal with her delusions tonight." Caroline grabbed my arm tightly and glared at me with absolute venom burning in her dark eyes before turning away from me to rejoin her circle of wealthy friends. I adjusted my sleeve, refusing to let her see any reaction. I looked straight at Devin, whose chest was still puffed out in a ridiculous display of false dominance. "You did not pay for this estate, Devin," I stated clearly, my voice carrying just enough to slice through the ambient chatter of the room. "I actually arranged this venue myself." The music seemed to dip perfectly in time with my words. A heavy silence rippled outward from our circle. Devin let out a forced, booming laugh, looking around nervously to ensure his supposed Wall Street partners were not taking my claim seriously. Caroline whipped her head back around, her mouth hanging open in feigned shock. Before Devin could formulate another lie, a heavy hand clamped down on my shoulder. The grip was tight, the fingers digging into my collarbone with enough force to bruise. I turned my head and met the furious, bloodshot eyes of my father. Gregory Harrison stood towering over me, his face turning an alarming shade of crimson. He had been mingling by the bar, but my words had drawn him over like a magnet to a disaster. "What kind of sick, delusional game are you playing, Sienna?" my father snarled. The scent of expensive scotch and cheap cigars rolled off his breath. "Devin spent $50,000 to give your mother a night she deserves. He worked 70-hour weeks managing hedge funds to afford this luxury. And you show up here in your cheap dress trying to steal his credit." I stood my ground, refusing to shrink under his towering presence. "I am not playing a game, Dad. I am simply stating a fact. The black card of Devin did not secure this mansion. I did." The grip of my father on my shoulder shifted, his hand moving down to wrap brutally around my upper arm. His fingers clamped down like a vice. "You are a pathological liar," he hissed, his voice rising in volume. You have always been insanely jealous of your sister. You could not stand it when she married a real man, a successful man. You sit in your apartment making no money, and the second we try to celebrate success, you swoop in like a vulture to ruin it. You are hurting my arm, I said, keeping my tone perfectly level. I did not struggle. I knew struggling was exactly what he wanted. He wanted me to look hysterical. He wanted me to play the part of the crazy, jealous spinster sister. I would not give him the satisfaction. Let her go, Gregory, a woman in the crowd, murmured. But my father ignored her completely. The veins in his neck were bulging. He was a man whose own construction company was quietly sinking a man desperate to cling to the illusion of wealth that Devon provided. He needed Devon to be a millionaire to validate his own poor life choices. My ultimate truth threatened that fragile illusion. I am not letting you ruin the night of your mother, he shouted, fully abandoning any pretense of country club manners. You are a toxic, bitter failure of a daughter. You contribute nothing to this family. You bring a garbage piece of paper as a gift, and then you try to humiliate the man who actually takes care of us. Devon stood a few feet away, shaking his head with a theatrical look of extreme pity. It is okay, Gregory. Let it go. We all know she struggles with reality. Do not let her ruin the vibe. No. Devon, my father barked, though his eyes never left mine. This stops tonight. I am done dealing with her jealousy. I am done letting her embarrass this family. With a violent jerk, my father began to physically march me across the grand foyer. The Azure estate had a massive open-concept layout, meaning every single one of the 100 elite guests had a front-row seat to my eviction. The string quartet stopped playing entirely. The waiters froze with their silver trays of expensive appetizers. Complete silence fell over the massive room, broken only by the sound of my low heels clicking against the imported marble floors and the heavy, angry breathing of my father. I kept my head held high. I did not cry. I did not look down. I met the eyes of the wealthy guests as we passed them. I saw women covering their mouths in absolute shock. I saw businessmen exchanging uncomfortable glances. I saw my mother Cynthia standing by the staircase, sipping her champagne with a look of supreme satisfaction. She was loving this. To her, this was the ultimate validation that she was the victim of a terrible daughter and that she was finally excising the cancer from her perfect life. Caroline leaned against Devon, whispering something in his ear that made him smirk. They looked like royalty, watching a peasant being dragged to the guillotine. Move, my father growled, shoving me forward when I hesitated near the coat check. You are a disgrace. I look at you, and I feel nothing but regret. We gave you everything, and you turned out to be a worthless, miserable drain on our lives. We reached the massive double doors of the grand entrance. The valet attendants outside turned to look through the glass, their eyes wide. My father reached out, grabbed the brass handles, and shoved the heavy oak doors open to the cool night air. He pushed me forward one last time. I stumbled slightly on the stone threshold, but regained my balance, smoothing my silk skirt. The night wind whipped around me, but the chill was nothing compared to the ice in the eyes of my father. He stood in the doorway, blocking the light and the warmth of my own house. Leave now, my father yelled, his voice echoing off the stone pillars. You do not belong here. The heavy oak doors slammed shut behind me with a resounding thud that vibrated through the stone pillars. I stood alone on the expansive circular driveway of the Azure estate. The crisp night air swept across my bare arms, but I did not shiver. I did not cry. For 33 years, my family had conditioned me to believe that my worth was tied to their approval. They expected me to crumble, to weep on the pavement, to beg for their forgiveness, for ruining the perfect illusion they had built around Devon and Caroline. Instead, a profound and absolute silence settled over my mind. The chaotic noise of my mother complaining, my father shouting, and my sister mocking me vanished. In its place was an ice-cold clarity. I took a deep, steadying breath and smoothed the silk of my dress. The emotional manipulation they had wielded over me like a weapon was finally broken. They had crossed the point of no return, and now They were going to face the reality they had so desperately tried to ignore. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. The screen illuminated my calm reflection. I bypassed my personal contacts and opened my secure business directory. I pressed the name for Penelope, the general manager of the Azure estate, a woman I had personally hired 2 years ago to oversee my flagship properties across the Midwest. The phone rang only twice before she answered, her voice crisp and professional despite the late hour. "Good evening, Miss Harrison. Is everything all right with the venue tonight?" Penelope asked. She knew I was attending a family function incognito, blending in as a regular guest to observe the operations. "I need you to execute an immediate operational override, Penelope," I said, my voice steady and commanding. "This is Sienna Harrison, the owner. I am officially canceling the Harrison birthday event." There was a brief pause on the line as Penelope processed the sudden shift in protocol. "Cancel the event, ma'am. But the dinner service is just about to begin." "Cancel it immediately," I repeated. "I want the music cut. I want the catering staff to stop serving. You are to walk into that main hall and inform Cynthia Harrison and her guests that the owner has revoked their access to the property. You have exactly 20 minutes to clear the entire estate. Have the security team escort everyone out to the driveway. No exceptions." "Understood, Ms. Harrison," Penelope replied, her tone shifting into absolute compliance. "Security will begin the evacuation protocol immediately. What reason should I provide to the guests for the sudden cancellation?" "That brings me to my next instruction," I said, looking back at the glowing windows of the mansion. "That $50,000 invoice for tonight. I need you to run the primary card Devin provided for the deposit. Do not run it for a hold. Run it for the full amount right now. It is going to decline because his credit card on file is a fake. When it declines, you will invalidate the transaction and announce to the room that the host cannot pay for the venue." Penelope gasped softly. "He submitted fraudulent payment information." "Yes, he did. He is a fraud, and I am done protecting his ego at the expense of my property. Invalidate his account, kick them out, and lock down the estate. Do it right now." "Consider it done, ma'am. I will handle this personally." I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my clutch. The satisfaction was not a fiery, vengeful feeling. It was a cold, calculated execution of justice. I turned away from the grand entrance and walked toward the valet stand. The young attendant who had spoken to me earlier hurried forward, holding the keys to my dark SUV. "Are you leaving so soon, miss?" he asked, looking concerned as he handed me the keys. "I am," I replied, offering him a polite nod. "And I suggest you prepare your team. There is going to be a massive rush for vehicles in about 5 minutes. It is going to be a very busy night for you." I climbed into the driver's seat of my reliable, unassuming vehicle. The leather steering wheel felt grounding beneath my hands. I started the engine, the quiet hum of the motor a stark contrast to the dramatic scene I knew was about to unfold inside the mansion walls. I put the car in drive and slowly rolled down the long, winding driveway, flanked by ancient oak trees and manicured hedges. I looked in the rearview mirror one last time. The Azure estate stood magnificently against the dark sky, a testament to my hard work, my vision, and my silent resilience. I had built that empire from nothing, while my family sat in their suburban home mocking my ambition. Now, they were standing inside my masterpiece, about to be thrown out into the cold. I merged onto the main highway, leaving the affluent neighborhood behind. My destination was not my modest city apartment. I bypassed the downtown exits and headed toward the private aviation sector of the international airport. I had anticipated that this night might end poorly, though I had not expected the physical assault from my father. I had packed my bags days ago and stored them securely in the cargo hold of my Gulfstream jet. The highway stretched out before me, empty and inviting. My phone remained silent in my purse. The storm of text messages and panicked phone calls had not yet begun, but I knew they were coming. The moment Penelope announced the fraudulent credit card, my family would realize their grave mistake. It was time to fly to my private villa in Santorini. Today was just the beautiful beginning of the absolute destruction of their pathetic lies. And tomorrow, they would wake up to a world where they had nothing left to hide behind. I drove faster into the night. The dashboard clock glowed a vibrant neon blue, marking the exact moment my past officially severed from my future. Barely 10 minutes had passed since my tires left the immaculate gravel of the estate, when my phone vibrated in the cup holder. The caller ID displayed Penelope. I tapped the screen to answer, putting her on speaker as I navigated the empty highway toward the private airfield. "It is done, Miss Harrison," Penelope reported, her voice maintaining that perfect blend of hospitality and ruthless efficiency I paid her so well for. "I executed the operational override exactly as you instructed. You might want to hear how it played out." "Tell me everything," I replied, keeping my eyes on the road, though a genuine smile finally broke across my face. Penelope described the scene with clinical precision. Inside the grand hall, the string quartet had just transitioned into a lively classical piece. My mother, Cynthia, had taken her position at the base of the sweeping staircase. She clinked her crystal champagne flute with a silver spoon, commanding the attention of the 100 elite guests. She was mid-sentence, basking in the glow of her perceived high society triumph, praising Devon for his immense generosity and unparalleled Wall Street success. She had just raised her glass to toast her perfect family when Penelope gave the signal. The music was cut abruptly. Cut. The sudden, jarring silence echoed through the cavernous room. Before the guests could even murmur in confusion, 6 of my private security contractors marched through the double doors. They were dressed in sharp black suits, moving with military precision to flank the exits. Penelope walked directly to the center of the room, standing just feet away from my mother. "Ladies and gentlemen," Penelope had announced, her voice amplified and echoing off the vaulted ceilings, "I apologize for the sudden interruption. However, the owner of the Azure Estate has officially canceled this event and revoked all access to the property. You have exactly 20 minutes to vacate the premises. Please proceed to the valet stand immediately." My mother froze, her champagne flute suspended in mid-air. The color drained from her face. Penelope told me the wealthy country club women in the front row immediately began whispering, their eyes darting between Cynthia and the security team. Gregory stormed forward, his face turning that familiar shade of furious red, demanding to know what was going on and threatening to sue the venue. Penelope did not flinch. Instead, she turned her attention directly to Devon, who was suddenly looking incredibly pale next to a horrified Caroline. Furthermore, Penelope projected clearly, ensuring every prominent business partner and socialite in the room heard her next words. "The $50,000 invoice for tonight remains unpaid. Mr. Devon, the primary credit card you provided on file has just been declined. It flagged in our system as a fraudulent account." The collective gasp from the crowd was audible, even to Penelope. Devon stammered, frantically patting his custom-tailored pockets. He tried to laugh it off, adopting his usual smooth-talking persona, claiming it was a simple bank error or a security freeze due to his massive wealth. He pulled out another card, trying to hand it to Penelope to save face. Penelope shook her head, refusing to take it. "Our system flagged your profile for suspected fraud, sir. I have been instructed not to accept any further payment methods from you. If you and your family do not exit the property immediately, I am authorized to involve local law enforcement for theft of services and credit card fraud." The word fraud hung in the air, thick and devastating. The elite guests, people whose opinions my mother valued more than her own flesh and blood, did not wait around to see what happened next. They turned their backs on my family and flooded toward the cloakroom. The social ruin was instantaneous. People whispered about Devon being a con artist. They muttered about my parents putting on a pathetic, fake display of wealth. "They are currently being escorted out onto the front lawn," Penelope informed me over the phone. Mr. Gregory tried to argue, but security physically directed him out the door. "Your mother is inconsolable, weeping near the fountain." She keeps trying to apologize to the departing guests, but they are rolling up their windows and driving away. Caroline is screaming at Devin, demanding to know why his card declined. It is a complete disaster, Ms. Harrison. Perfect, I murmured. Make sure they do not take so much as a cocktail napkin with them. Lock the gates the moment their rental car clears the property line. Understood, Penelope said. Have a safe flight, ma'am. I ended the call. The silence of the car felt magnificent. For years, Cynthia and Gregory had paraded their fake superiority, relying on the illusion of wealth to mask their cruelty. Now, they were standing shivering on the manicured grass of my property, stripped of their dignity, their friends, and their fake prestige. The country club gossip would destroy them by morning. My mother would never be able to show her face at a high society luncheon again. Her friends had witnessed her son-in-law being publicly outed as a fraud. The humiliation would stick to them like tar. I pressed my foot down on the accelerator, the engine roaring as I sped through the dark. I felt no guilt, only an overwhelming sense of liberation. The cold wind outside mirrored the ice in my veins. They had evicted me from their fake world. In return, I evicted them from reality. The karma was swift, public, and absolute. They were left on the lawn, utterly humiliated, while I was headed for the sky. I rolled my window down slightly, letting the fresh breeze fill the cabin. Tonight was glorious, but tomorrow morning would be an absolute masterpiece of vengeance when they realized the awful truth of their actions. Leaving the chaos of the estate miles behind me, I watched the neon glow of the dashboard clock shift to midnight as I pulled up to the guarded gates of the private aviation sector. A uniformed security officer quickly recognized my vehicle and waved me right through. I navigated the tarmac until the gleaming silhouette of my Gulfstream jet came into view. The cabin crew was waiting at the base of the illuminated stairs. My pilot nodded as I stepped out of my SUV. The flight plan to Santorini is cleared. We are ready for immediate departure. Thank you, I replied, handing my keys to the ground crew coordinator who would garage my vehicle. I slowly climbed the carpeted stairs and entered the plush cabin. A dedicated flight attendant silently took my coat and offered me a chilled glass of sparkling water. I sank into my favorite oversized captain chair by the window. The contrast between my actual reality and the pathetic narrative my family tried to force on me was jarring. They honestly believed I was a destitute failure driving a clunker, oblivious to the fact that I was currently buckling myself into a luxury private aircraft that I owned outright. Just as I settled back into the soft leather, my phone began to vibrate violently against the polished wood of the table. A barrage of notifications lit up the screen in rapid succession. I picked up the device and saw 84 unread messages, all flooding in from the Harrison family group chat. I tapped the screen as the delusion of my relatives unfolded in green text bubbles. Gregory had sent the first volley. Sienna, what kind of sick, twisted stunt did you pull tonight? We were just humiliated in front of the entire country club. You are a sociopath. Did you bribe that venue manager to fake a credit card decline today? Cynthia quickly followed up her messages, erratic due to her panic. You ruined my milestone birthday. You were so jealous of your sister and her wealthy husband that you paid the staff to embarrass him. Devin is furious. His Wall Street partners saw everything. You destroyed our social standing. How could you be so evil? I stared at the screen, genuinely amazed by the mental gymnastics they were performing. Instead of recognizing the obvious truth that Devin was a broke fraud, whose credit card had legitimately bounced, they had fabricated an insane conspiracy theory. They believed I, the supposed struggling nobody, had somehow produced enough cash to bribe the general manager of an elite estate to stage a fake eviction. The logic was completely absent, swallowed whole by their desperate need to protect the illusion Devin provided. The messages continued to pour in, scrolling upward faster than I could read. Caroline chimed in, echoing her husband's lies. You are sick, Sienna. Devin says he is going to sue you for defamation. He had plenty of funds in that account. He knows you orchestrated this because you hate seeing us happy. You are going to pay for this. Then came the message from Gregory, that truly highlighted the depth of their financial brainwashing. He typed out a demand so ridiculous I had to read it twice. Devin spent $50,000 trying to give your mother a nice night. Because of your jealous stunt, the venue kept his deposit and kicked us out. We are demanding that you fix this. You need to go to the bank tomorrow morning and take out a loan. You are going to transfer $50,000 directly to Devin to compensate him. If you do not wire him the money by noon, we are cutting you out of this family forever. I let out a sharp laugh. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. Devin had run a fake credit card, embarrassed them all, and somehow convinced my parents that I owed him $50,000 to repair his wounded ego. My father, a man whose own business was quietly drowning in debt, was demanding I take out a loan to fund a con artist. They were willing to sacrifice their own daughter to maintain the fiction that they were part of high society. I scrolled through the endless stream of toxic demands, threats, and insults. They called me ungrateful, a failure, a disgrace, and a monster. There was not an ounce of reflection, not one question asking if perhaps Devin was not who he claimed to be. They had chosen the lie over their own flesh and blood. I felt absolutely no anger anymore. The resentment that had chained me to them for 33 years evaporated completely in the pressurized cabin of my jet. I did not owe them an explanation, I did not owe them a defense, and I certainly did not owe them a dime. I typed a single word into the family group chat. Goodbye. I hit send and watched it deliver. Before they could type another unhinged response, I pressed the power button. The screen went entirely black, cutting off their toxic voices, their ridiculous demands, and their pathetic illusions. I slid the dead phone into my purse and looked up at the flight attendant standing quietly nearby. "Please let the captain know we are ready for departure," I said, my voice calm and resolute. "Tell him to take us directly to Santorini." The attendant nodded with a warm smile. Within minutes, the powerful engines roared to life, a deep hum that felt incredibly satisfying. The jet taxied smoothly down the runway, gaining speed until the nose lifted and we launched into the night sky. I watched out the window as the city lights shrank into glowing specks far below. The heavy, suffocating weight of the Harrison family was firmly on the ground, trapped in their own delusions. I leaned back into my seat, closed my eyes, and let the gentle climb carry me toward Greece, ready for the financial destruction that awaited them at sunrise. The flight over the Atlantic Ocean was a blur of very deep restorative sleep. I woke up early as the jet began its smooth descent over the sparkling azure waters of the Aegean Sea. The landing was absolutely flawless. A private helicopter waited on the tarmac to ferry me the rest of the way, ensuring I bypassed any commercial airport traffic. Within an hour, I was walking through the carved wooden doors of my own private cliffside villa in Santorini. The estate was a masterpiece of whitewashed stone and infinity pools that spilled directly into the caldera below. The villa staff had prepared everything for my arrival. A gentle sea breeze drifted through the open terrace doors, carrying the scent of salt and blooming bougainvillea. I walked out onto the sun-drenched patio and leaned against the smooth white railing, breathing in the absolute tranquility. This was my world, built on relentless ambition and undeniable success. I accepted a freshly brewed espresso from my house manager, thanked him quietly, and sat down at the glass patio table overlooking the volcanic cliffs. It was time to face the noise. I reached into my travel bag and pulled out my phone, pressing the power button. The screen illuminated and immediately began buzzing with a renewed avalanche of missed calls and text messages. I ignored the frantic green bubbles from my mother and sister, swiping past their desperate attempts to regain control of the narrative. Instead, I opened my secure business email client. Amidst the usual morning briefings, one particular subject line stood out. It was flagged with high priority and titled Official Notice of Legal Action, Defamation and Damages. I raised an eyebrow and tapped the screen to open the message. The email purported to be from a senior partner at a prestigious-sounding law firm in New York representing Devin and Caroline. I read through the document, taking a sip of my espresso. The letter accused me of orchestrating a malicious attack to humiliate a prominent Wall Street executive, causing severe emotional distress. The demands were outlined in bold, aggressive formatting. The supposed attorney demanded an immediate public apology to be published in several local Chicago newspapers. Furthermore, The letter stipulated that I was to wire a settlement of $1 million to an offshore escrow account by the end of the business week to avoid a catastrophic federal lawsuit. If I failed to comply, the lawyer threatened to freeze my assets and destroy my livelihood. I set my coffee cup down on the glass table and burst out laughing. The sound echoed across the empty terrace, bright and unhindered. I laughed until my ribs ached. It was the most pathetic amateurish attempt at intimidation I had ever seen. Devin had clearly typed this up himself using a fake law firm letterhead he probably downloaded from a free template website. The legal jargon was wildly incorrect. He even misspelled defamation in the second paragraph. Devin was trying to bully a billionaire real estate mogul with a forged cease and desist letter. He thought he was playing chess, but he did not even know what board we were sitting at. The laughter subsided, replaced by a cold, calculating focus. They wanted to play a high-stakes financial game. I opened my encrypted contact list and dialed my lead corporate attorney in New York, a man named Bradley, who managed a team of the most ruthless litigators and forensic accountants on the eastern seaboard. He answered on the first ring, his voice crisp and alert. "Good morning, Sienna. How is Greece?" "The weather is beautiful, Bradley," I replied, my tone shifting into pure business. "But we have a pest control issue stateside that requires your immediate attention. I just forwarded you an email. I need you to look at it." I heard the clicking of a keyboard over the line, followed by a brief silence as Bradley scanned the document. Then I heard him chuckle softly. "This is a joke, right? The firm listed here does not even exist." "It is a joke," I confirmed. "But the man who sent it is a parasite currently attached to my family. His name is Devin. He is married to my sister Caroline. He claims to be a high-profile hedge fund manager on Wall Street. I want you to unleash the hounds, Bradley. I want a full, ruthless forensic financial background check on him. I want to know every bank account he has ever opened, every credit card he has maxed out, every shell company he has registered. Find out exactly how he is funding his fake lifestyle." I looked out at the vast expanse of the Aegean Sea, the deep blue water reflecting my own merciless intent. "Do not stop with Devin," I instructed smoothly. "I want a complete microscopic audit of my father. Look into Gregory Harrison and his construction materials company. I have suspected for a while that his business is failing, but he is keeping up appearances to match Devin. I want to know his exact debt-to-income ratio. I want to know who holds his mortgages, who his creditors are, and if he has leveraged any personal assets. If there is a single crack in his financial foundation, I want to know exactly where it is and how deep it goes. I want this compiled within 24 hours. "Consider it done," Sienna Bradley replied. "My team will start pulling the filings immediately. We will trace every dime connected to Devin and your father. I will have a comprehensive dossier delivered to your secure server by tomorrow morning your time." I thanked him and ended the call. The sun was fully up right now, bathing the white cliffs of Santorini in brilliant light. My family had shoved me out of my own property, believing they held all the power. They had no idea they had just handed me the exact tools I needed to dismantle their entire false reality. The Aegean sun reflected brilliantly off my infinity pool as I sat at the glass patio table the following morning. The air was warm, carrying the faint scent of sea salt. I took a slow sip of my espresso. My secure tablet rested in front of me. At precisely 8 in the morning, a notification chimed. An encrypted file from Bradley had arrived. I entered my biometric passcode and opened the dossier. Bradley had named the master file House of Cards, a fitting title for the absolute catastrophe I was about to uncover. I tapped the subfolder labeled Devin. I expected to find an overleveraged day trader or a low-level broker drowning in credit card debt. What I found was exponentially worse. Devin was not a hedge fund manager. According to federal regulatory databases, Devin did not hold a basic financial securities license. He had zero affiliation with any Wall Street firm. Instead, the documents revealed a textbook, highly illegal Ponzi scheme. Devin registered a string of shell companies out of Delaware. He was soliciting millions from wealthy individuals in my parents' country club circle, promising guaranteed high-yield returns on non-existent real estate developments. He took money from new investors to pay fake dividends to early investors, keeping the overflow for himself. His bank statements prove the cash was bleeding out fast. The $50,000 estate rental, the designer suits, the lavish dinners. It was all funded by stolen money. Even the brand new Porsche he bragged about in my driveway was fully leased under Caroline, utilizing a predatory financing rate currently destroying her credit. Devin was a complete phantom. He was a criminal waiting to be indicted. I swiped to the next section, my eyes narrowing as I cross-referenced the list of defrauded investors with my parents' financial records. A cold knot formed in my stomach, though not out of pity. It was sheer disbelief at their boundless stupidity. My mother and father had handed over everything. Bradley uncovered the wire transfers. Over 2 years, Gregory and Cynthia systematically liquidated their entire retirement portfolio. Every dollar they saved, every mutual fund, had been cashed out and funneled directly into offshore accounts controlled by Devin. My parents were absolutely, completely broke. They had zero liquidity. They financed the flashy lifestyle of the man who mocked me in the driveway, while lecturing me on how a real man provides. They bought into his illusion so deeply, they sacrificed their own survival. In return, Devin drained them dry. The irony was poetic and brutal. The golden son-in-law they worshipped was the architect of their total financial ruin. I took another sip of my espresso, my heart beating with a steady, rhythmic calm. I opened the final folder, detailing the current status of my father and his construction materials business. I always knew Gregory was a poor manager, prone to making impulsive, ego-driven decisions. But the balance sheets Bradley uncovered were catastrophic. The company was drowning in $5 million of high-interest commercial debt. Gregory had taken out massive mezzanine loans just to keep the lights on and maintain his country club membership. He had leveraged all his heavy machinery and the commercial property itself. The business was technically insolvent, surviving month to month by the skin of its teeth. I scrolled down to the summary page where Bradley had highlighted a specific recent transaction in bright yellow. He had added a personal note in the margin. I suggest you read the ownership transfer on the primary debt note very carefully, boss. I zoomed in on the document. Last week, a massive commercial bank bundled several underperforming corporate loans and sold them off at a discount to private equity firms to clear their books. The $5 million debt belonging to my father was in that bundle. I looked at the name of the purchasing entity. It was Apex Capital Partners. My breath hitched in my throat. Apex Capital Partners was a subsidiary umbrella corporation wholly owned and operated by my primary real estate holding firm. My asset management team in New York acquired distressed debt as a routine investment strategy to seize commercial real estate. I stared at the screen, letting the magnitude of the revelation wash over me. I owned the debt. I did not just have leverage over my father, I literally owned him. I owned his company, his warehouse, his machinery, and his corporate future. I held the sole legal authority to call in the loan immediately and trigger an aggressive corporate foreclosure. I leaned back in my chair and looked out at the endless horizon of the Aegean Sea. The Greek sun warmed my face, but my smile was made of pure ice. My father had physically grabbed my arm and thrown me out the front doors of my own property, calling me a worthless failure. He had stood by while his fraudulent son-in-law insulted me. He had allowed my mother to treat me like a peasant. All the while, his entire existence, his business, his livelihood, and his legacy rested squarely in the palm of my hand. They had demanded I take out a loan to pay a con artist $50,000. They had threatened to cut me off and destroy my reputation. They thought they were untouchable sitting in their suburban mansion. But the walls of their pathetic house of cards were already caving in. Devin was going to prison. Caroline was drowning in debt. Cynthia had lost her entire retirement. and I was going to push the button that would legally seize the only thing Gregory had left. I picked up my phone to call Bradley back. The time for observation was over. The demolition was about to begin. It was time to show them what real power looked like, and make them pay for every single insult they ever threw at me. I ended the call with Bradley, setting my phone down on the glass table. The Aegean Sea sparkled brilliantly under the midday sun, a stark contrast to the toxic storm brewing back in Chicago. I intended to disconnect, to enjoy absolute peace, but the quiet was shattered by a rapid succession of notifications pinging on my secure tablet. These were not financial alerts from my executive team. They were social media tags. My public relations monitor, a software designed to track mentions of my name across the internet, had just flagged a massive spike in activity. I picked up the tablet and opened the alerts. The source of the spike was a video uploaded to Facebook and Instagram simultaneously. It was posted by my sister Caroline, and it had already amassed thousands of views and hundreds of shares in a matter of hours. I tapped the play button, leaning back in my chair to watch the performance unfold. The video opened on the perfectly manicured living room of my parents' suburban home. Caroline and my mother Cynthia sat close together on the pristine white sofa. They looked entirely different from the arrogant women who had mocked me the night before. They wore minimal makeup, dressed in muted, soft colors, their hair intentionally styled to look slightly disheveled. Cynthia was clutching a tissue, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy, looking every inch the devastated, heartbroken matriarch. Caroline wrapped a protective arm around her, staring into the camera with an expression of profound sorrow. "Hi, everyone," Caroline began, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "We debated whether to make this public, but our family is going through an absolute nightmare, and we need your help. Last night was supposed to be a beautiful celebration for our mother's 55th birthday. My amazing husband Devin spent $50,000 of his own hard-earned money to rent a gorgeous estate, so our mother could have the night she truly deserved." Cynthia dabbed her eyes with the tissue, letting out a perfectly timed, muffled sob. "But the night was completely destroyed," Caroline continued, looking directly into the lens. "My older sister Sienna showed up uninvited. We love Sienna, we really do, but she has been struggling with severe mental health issues for years. She has always harbored this deep, toxic jealousy toward me and Devin because of our financial success. Last night, she suffered a complete psychotic break. I watched, my expression turning to stone, as my sister weaponized the concept of mental illness to cover up their public humiliation and financial ruin. It was a masterclass in narcissistic manipulation. She screamed at the guests, Cynthia added, her voice cracking flawlessly. She physically attacked her father. She bribed someone on the venue staff to cut the power and force everyone out into the cold. We tried to get her psychiatric help. We begged her to go to a hospital, but she refused. She ran away into the night, and we have no idea where she is. We are terrified for her, but we are also completely devastated." Caroline took over again, leaning closer to the camera. "Because of Sienna and her psychotic episode, the venue management forced us off the property and refused to refund the $50,000 Devin paid. They claimed breach of contract due to the disturbance. My husband worked so hard for that money, and my mother was stripped of a milestone memory she can never get back. We are asking our community, our friends, and anyone who understands the pain of dealing with a mentally unstable family member to help us. We have set up a GoFundMe to recover the $50,000 stolen from us by this tragedy. Any amount helps. Please keep Sienna in your prayers." The video ended. I sat in silence on my sun-drenched balcony, processing the sheer audacity of what I had just watched. They were not just lying to cover up Devin bouncing a fraudulent credit card. They were actively monetizing their own humiliation. They were framing me as a deranged lunatic, begging the public to reimburse them for a party they never actually paid for. They wanted $50,000 of free money from sympathetic strangers, all while destroying my personal reputation to secure it. I scrolled down to the comments section. It was a bloodbath. Hundreds of people from their country club circle, distant relatives, and complete strangers were leaving messages of support for my mother and sister. People were calling me a monster, a sociopath, and a jealous failure. They praised Devin for being such a generous, long-suffering husband. They praised Cynthia for being a strong mother dealing with a broken child. The GoFundMe link attached to the post was already gaining traction. I refreshed the page and watched the donation counter tick upward. $500, $1,000, $2,500. People were literally handing their hard-earned money over to a family of con artists. For a brief moment, a flash of genuine anger flared in my chest. This was my name they were dragging through the mud. These were people who were supposed to protect me, love me, and defend me. Instead, they were publicly crucifying me to protect the fragile ego of a criminal and line their own empty pockets. They were painting me as the exact thing they actually were: unstable, toxic, and desperate. But the anger vanished as quickly as it arrived, replaced by a cold, calculating amusement. They thought they were controlling the narrative. They thought they had won the public relations war because I was remaining silent. They fundamentally misunderstood the situation. I was not remaining silent out of shame or fear. I was remaining silent because I was letting them dig their grave as deep as humanly possible. Every dollar they collected through that fraudulent GoFundMe campaign was another nail in their legal coffin. Wire fraud. Theft by deception. Devin was already running a Ponzi scheme, and now Caroline and Cynthia were publicly committing felony fraud on the internet, attaching their faces and names to the crime. They were handing me the rope they would use to hang themselves. I locked the tablet screen and set it aside. I did not need to issue a public statement or film a tearful rebuttal video. I did not need to argue with strangers in the comment section who knew nothing about my actual life. Let them have their online sympathy. Let them collect their fraudulent donations. Let them bask in the fake glory of their victimhood for a few more hours. The higher they climbed on their pedestal of lies, the harder the impact would be when gravity finally took over. I stood up from the table, stretching my arms above my head, and walked toward the edge of the infinity pool. The water was crystal clear, merging seamlessly with the horizon. I was going to let them enjoy this temporary illusion of victory. I would let them sleep soundly tonight, dreaming of the money they were stealing from the internet. Tomorrow, the real war would begin, and I would not be fighting with Facebook posts. I would be fighting with foreclosure notices, federal indictments, and the absolute total annihilation of their financial existence. I stepped away from the edge of the pool and walked back into the cool, shaded interior of my villa. My phone, which I had left resting on the polished marble countertop, began to vibrate with a violent, unrelenting intensity. It danced across the smooth stone, buzzing loudly enough to echo through the high ceilings of the kitchen. This was no longer the isolated panic of my mother and sister. The social media video had successfully acted as a flare gun, summoning the entire extended family to the front lines of their fabricated war. They were the flying monkeys, conditioned over decades to attack whoever my mother pointed her finger at. I picked up the device and unlocked the screen. A wave of notifications cascaded downward, a relentless waterfall of toxicity. I opened my messages and watched the vitriol pour in from people who had not bothered to call me on my birthday in over 10 years. Aunt Beatrice, my mother's older sister, had sent a block of text entirely in capital letters. She called me a sociopath, a miserable spinster, and a stain on the Harrison family legacy. She demanded that I wire my mother the $50,000 immediately or face complete excommunication from the family tree. Right below her message was a text from my cousin Brandon. Brandon, who was currently 28 and still living in his parents' basement, decided to lecture me on ambition. He told me I was a jealous failure who could not handle the fact that Caroline had married a highly successful Wall Street genius. He told me I needed to seek psychiatric help before I ended up completely alone and destitute. The messages were identical in their tone and their talking points. My mother had trained them well. They were parroting her exact phrases, calling me unstable, ungrateful, and toxic. Not a single aunt, uncle, or cousin asked for my side of the story. Not one of them questioned why a billionaire hedge fund manager would need a GoFundMe campaign to recover from a canceled party. They simply swallowed the lie whole because it was easier to attack the designated family scapegoat than to question the golden child. I swiped away the text messages and opened my voicemail inbox. There were 14 new audio messages. I tapped the most recent one left by my father's younger brother, Uncle Thomas. He was a man with a notorious temper and a history of failed business ventures. He always resented anyone who did not bow to his supposed authority. I pressed play and held the phone in front of me, listening to his rough, booming voice fill the quiet space of my Greek villa. "Listen to me very carefully," Sienna Thomas growled through the speaker, his breathing heavy and aggressive. "I just watched your mother crying on the internet because of your psychotic little stunt. You have crossed a line you cannot uncross. I am not going to sit around and watch you disrespect your parents and humiliate Devon. I know exactly where you live. I'm getting in my truck right now and I am driving over to that crappy little apartment of yours. You are going to open the door and I am going to teach you a serious lesson about family respect. If you do not answer, I will break the door down. Do not test me." The voicemail ended with a sharp click. I stood in my kitchen staring at the phone. My uncle was threatening physical violence. He was actually driving to my old address intending to intimidate and assault me to defend the honor of a con artist. I felt a cold, sharp smile touch the corners of my mouth. The sheer, magnificent delusion of his threat was almost intoxicating. Uncle Thomas thought he was heading to the rundown one-bedroom apartment in a sketchy neighborhood that I had rented right out of college. My family had never bothered to ask for my updated address because they never intended to visit me. They had absolutely no idea that I currently lived in a $12 million ultra-secure triplex penthouse in the center of the financial district. If Thomas actually managed to find my current building, his aggressive arrival would be a spectacle. He would not find a flimsy wooden door to kick down. He would find a bank of reinforced steel security gates, biometric scanners, and a highly trained armed security detail operating the front desk 24 hours a day. If he so much as raised his voice in the lobby, my security team would have him pinned to the marble floor and arrested for trespassing and making terroristic threats before he even made it to the private elevator bank. I almost wished I was there to watch him try. I deleted his voicemail and tossed the phone onto the plush sofa in the living area. The barrage of messages and violent threats had finally provided me with absolute, unwavering clarity. For years I had harbored a tiny, suppressed hope that maybe the extended family was different. I had wondered if maybe my aunts and uncles were just unaware of how deeply toxic my parents truly were. Today proved that hope was a complete waste of energy. The entire family structure was a diseased, rotting organism. They were all complicit. They thrived on the drama, feeding off the false hierarchy that placed people like Devon at the top and designated me as the permanent punching bag. They were not victims of my mother's manipulation. They were active, willing participants who enjoyed the cruelty just as much as she did. Any lingering hesitation I had about destroying them vanished completely. I felt no guilt. I felt no familial obligation. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out at the breathtaking beauty of the Mediterranean. The old Sienna, the girl who craved their validation and feared their rejection, was officially dead. She had died the moment my father shoved me out the doors of the Azure estate. I was not just going to cut them off. I was going to burn the bridge to ashes and salt the earth beneath it. I picked up my phone, navigated to my settings, and initiated a complete block on every single contact associated with my bloodline. I erased their numbers, blocked their social media accounts, and configured my server to automatically reject any emails originating from their addresses. The digital silence that followed was incredibly peaceful. I was entirely severed from their toxic web. They could scream into the void, rally their flying monkeys, and plot their petty interventions, but they would never reach me again. The stage was set. They exposed their true natures and walked blindly into my trap. I poured a glass of iced lemon water, feeling lighter than I had in 3 decades. I was fully prepared for the financial strike that would hit them tomorrow morning. The Mediterranean sun rose over the caldera, casting a brilliant golden light across my terrace. I sat at the glass table with a fresh cup of black coffee, feeling rested. My phone remained silent. The comprehensive blockade I initiated last night worked perfectly. I did not need to see the fabricated tears of Caroline, or read another unhinged rant from my mother. The public relations team, monitoring my digital footprint, confirmed that the fraudulent campaign was still gaining traction among their country club friends. I instructed my team to take no action against the fundraiser just yet. I wanted the paper trail of their wire fraud to be as thick and undeniable as possible. Engaging with them online would only validate their delusional narrative and give them the attention they desperately craved. I preferred to strike where it actually mattered. I preferred to strike at the absolute core of their existence. I opened my encrypted laptop and initiated a secure video conference with Victor. Victor was the executive director of Apex Capital Partners, the specific subsidiary of my holding company. This subsidiary had recently acquired the distressed commercial debt of my father outright. He appeared on the screen within seconds, looking sharp and attentive in his office. "Good morning, Sienna," Victor said. "The final audits on the Harrison construction portfolio are entirely complete. It is a disaster. The company is in breach of almost every major financial covenant attached to the original loan agreement. Gregory Harrison has been cross-collateralizing his heavy machinery and manipulating his accounts to hide insolvency." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Perfect. I want you to call the loan in immediately. Victor, issue a formal notice of default and initiate aggressive commercial foreclosure proceedings today. I do not want a standard 30-day grace period extended. I want the maximum legal pressure applied. Today, freeze his business accounts and send the marshals to padlock the construction yard and seize the equipment." Victor nodded, typing rapidly on his secure end. "The debt is structured in a way that allows us to bypass standard mediation due to breaches. The default notices will be delivered by registered courier to his corporate office and his personal residence. They will arrive before noon, Central Time, ensuring he has zero operational liquidity today. Make sure the courier requires a direct signature from Gregory," I instructed. "I want him to look the messenger in the eye when his entire corporate legacy collapses." There was one more crucial thread to cut. While my father believed his struggling construction business was keeping their suburban mansion afloat, the reality differed. 5 years ago, when I first started making substantial capital gains, I discovered my parents were on the brink of quiet bankruptcy. Despite their relentless cruelty toward me, I possessed a lingering sense of obligation. I could not stomach the idea of them losing their home and facing public destitution. So, I hired a discreet wealth management firm in Chicago to set up a trust. The trust acted as an anonymous benefactor, funneling a massive monthly dividend into a fake pension. This pension operated strictly under the name of Gregory. For half a decade, I had been the silent safety net, keeping the Harrison family from drowning. I paid their massive mortgage. I funded the country club memberships they used to constantly belittle me. I financed the lavish lifestyle my mother flaunted on her social media. They never once questioned the sudden influx of anonymous cash. Gregory simply credited his own brilliant business acumen, assuming an old investment matured. Cynthia used the money to buy designer bags and throw extravagant parties for her friends. She always made sure to remind me how poor and unsuccessful I was in direct comparison. They bit the hand that fed them because they were too arrogant to look down properly. They had no idea whose hand was actually funding their entire existence. I minimized the video window with Victor and dialed the wealth management firm. The senior portfolio manager answered the phone immediately. "I need you to liquidate the Harrison Blind Trust," I commanded. my voice entirely devoid of emotion. Cease all monthly distributions to that account, effective immediately. Freeze the residual accounts and claw back any pending transfers. The manager paused clearly, surprised by the sudden and harsh executive directive. Miss Harrison, if we terminate the distributions today, the beneficiaries will miss their upcoming payments. They will default on the mortgage and the luxury auto lease payments by tomorrow morning. They have zero cushion in their primary checking accounts to absorb the shock of this. I am fully aware of their severe financial exposure, I replied. Shut it down. The charity has officially expired today. I disconnected the call and leaned back against the plush cushions of my patio chair. The twin financial strikes were now fully in motion. By lunchtime in Chicago, Gregory would receive a commercial foreclosure notice stripping him of his business entity. He would lose his warehouse, his heavy equipment, and his massive pride. When he inevitably scrambled to access his personal wealth to save his failing company, he would panic. He would log into his banking portal and find an absolute terrifying financial void. The magical pension fund that had subsidized their arrogant existence was completely gone forever. The safety net vanished into thin air, leaving nothing behind. They had physically thrown me out of my own property to protect a man running scams. They had taken to the internet to brand me a psychotic failure and a toxic sister. Now they were going to face the brutal, unforgiving reality of the free market without my protection. The walls were closing in on them rapidly, and there was no escape. I closed my laptop and closed my eyes, letting the warm, Mediterranean breeze wash over me. The financial squeeze had officially begun in earnest right now. The financial squeeze had officially begun in earnest right now. By late afternoon in Santorini, the sky began its slow transformation into a masterpiece of bruised purple and vibrant tangerine. I sat at a secluded table on the edge of my private terrace, a chilled glass of Assyrtiko wine resting in my hand. My private chef had prepared a flawless spread of grilled octopus, fresh local olives, and roasted vegetables. The gentle crash of the Aegean waves against the volcanic cliffs below provided a perfect symphony of absolute peace. It was a stark, beautiful contrast to the carnage I knew was unfolding thousands of miles away in Chicago. I took a slow bite of my dinner, savoring the rich, complex flavors entirely unbothered by the guilt that a weaker person might feel. I had spent 33 years swallowing their poison. Tonight I was dining like royalty, completely detached from the wreckage of the Harrison family. I watched a distant sailboat glide across the horizon, fully embracing the silence of my digital blockade. Then the silence broke. My private business cell phone, a separate device entirely isolated from my personal contacts, began to ring. Only my executive team and top-tier legal counsel possessed this specific number. I wiped my mouth with a linen napkin and glanced at the screen, expecting to see Bradley or Victor calling with an end-of-day status report. Instead, the caller ID displayed an unknown international number. I frowned, tapping the screen to accept the call. I held the phone to my ear, remaining silent, waiting for the caller to speak first. Sienna, a voice gasped. Please do not hang up. I froze. It was Gregory. He sounded completely unrecognizable. The booming, aggressive roar of the man who had physically dragged me out of the Azure estate was entirely gone. In its place was the raspy, trembling wheeze of a man who was actively suffocating. He had bypassed my personal blockade by calling my encrypted corporate line, a number he could have only obtained because it was listed as the primary contact on the foreclosure documents he had just been served. How did you get this number, Gregory? I asked, my voice as cold and flat as a sheet of ice. Please, you have to listen to me, he begged, his breathing ragged and uneven. Everything is gone. It is all gone. Sienna. They took the company. I took a slow sip of my wine, leaning back in my chair. Who took the company? The bank sold my commercial debt, he stammered, the panic escalating into a full-blown breakdown. I was at the warehouse this morning. 2 black SUVs pulled up out of nowhere. Marshals Siena, federal marshals, and corporate liquidators. They walked right into my office and handed me a formal default notice. They padlocked the loading docks. They seized the heavy machinery. They froze every single corporate operating account I have. I cannot make payroll tomorrow. I cannot pay my vendors. They literally escorted me off my own property in front of all my employees. He paused, letting out a wretched choking sound. I listened to his despair without a single ounce of pity. It gets worse, he continued, his voice breaking. I tried to log into my personal banking portal to wire emergency funds to my lawyer to fight this. The pension fund is gone. The anonymous trust that has been keeping our mortgage afloat for 5 years just vanished without a trace. Zero balances across the board. Cynthia is hysterical. We cannot even buy groceries right now. Caroline is screaming because Devin locked himself in the bedroom and will not answer any questions about his funds. Sienna, we are completely ruined. I stared out at the vibrant sunset, feeling the cool evening breeze sweep across my face. That sounds like a severe liquidity crisis, I replied clinically. What exactly do you expect me to do about it? You work in corporate circles, he pleaded, his desperation stripping away every last shred of his country club pride. You know people in finance, the entity that bought my debt, the company that is liquidating my entire life. It is a massive conglomerate called Harrison Holdings. When I saw the name, I thought it was just a sick coincidence. But you have connections, right? You told your mother you manage high-end clients. Please, Sienna, you have to know someone who can get me a meeting with their executives. You have to beg them to give me a 30-day extension. If they liquidate my assets tomorrow, your mother and I will be living on the street. I will do anything you want. I will apologize for the party. I will make Devin apologize. Just please call your bosses. Ask them to spare us. I set my wine glass down on the table. The ice clinked softly against the crystal. He was begging his exiled failure of a daughter to save him from the monstrous corporate entity tearing his life apart. The irony was so perfect, so incredibly satisfying, that it almost felt scripted. He truly believed I was a low-level employee, capable of begging for scraps of mercy from wealthy overlords. I took a deep breath, letting the absolute power of the moment settle over me. I looked at the beautiful Greek horizon and felt a supreme sense of control. I do not need to call my bosses to get you a meeting, Dad, I said, my voice echoing with ruthless, undeniable authority. I am Harrison Holdings. I did not wait to hear his response. I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red button, disconnecting the call instantly. I tossed the device onto the table and picked up my wineglass again. Gregory was now standing in his foreclosed warehouse, staring at a dead phone, forced to process the sheer horror of his reality. The daughter he threw away had just bought his entire world out. I let the absolute reality of that truth settle over the peaceful Mediterranean night, leaving my mobile phone on the glass patio table as I finally walked back inside my beautiful villa. I slept with a profound, unbroken peace, the kind of deep rest that only comes from absolute, undeniable vindication. The next morning, the sun was high and hot by the time I sat down at the oak dining table I had repurposed as a command center. I wore a crisp white silk blouse, my hair pulled back into a sleek knot. True power is quiet. It does not need to shout. I opened my encrypted laptop and drafted a single calendar invitation. I addressed it to Gregory, Cynthia, Caroline, and the email listed on the cease and desist letter Devin had sent. The subject line was simple: Mandatory Asset Restructuring Conference. In the body, I wrote one sentence: Attendance is strictly required if Gregory Harrison wishes to discuss the immediate suspension of his corporate liquidation. I set the meeting time for 10 in the morning. I poured myself a glass of iced sparkling water, tapped the launch button on my video conferencing software, and waited. I did not have to wait long. Exactly 3 minutes before the scheduled hour, the waiting room notification chimed. They were early, a classic tell of absolute desperation wrapped in false confidence. I clicked the button to admit all participants into the secure digital room. The screen split into a grid. Gregory and Cynthia sat shoulder to shoulder in their living room. Gregory looked like he had aged 20 years. His face was gray, his eyes bloodshot, rubbing his temples as if fighting a terminal headache. Cynthia had clearly spent hours doing her hair and makeup. She wore a structured designer blazer, sitting ramrod straight, her chin tilted upward in her signature pose of superiority. In another square, Caroline and Devin broadcast from the leased Porsche parked in my parents' driveway. Devin wore an aggressive red tie, his jaw set in a hard scowl. The final square contained a man sitting in a messy home office. The name read Attorney David Miller. He looked entirely out of his depth. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded neatly on the desktop, and offered a singular, chilling smile. "Good morning," I stated, my voice echoing with sterile corporate authority. "Let us begin." Before I could introduce the agenda, Devin leaned into his camera, filling his square on the grid. He held up a hand, abandoning professional courtesy. "Stop right there, Sienna," Devin barked, his voice booming with arrogance. "You do not get to dictate the terms of this meeting. You do not get to ambush this family with illegal corporate espionage and sit there smirking. I am taking the lead on this call, and you will listen carefully to what is about to happen to you." I raised an eyebrow but remained completely silent. I wanted to give him all the rope he needed to hang himself. "You made a catastrophic mistake," Devin continued, jabbing a finger at the camera. "You think because you scammed your way into a mid-level position at Harrison Holdings that you can pull strings to harass my father-in-law. You think you can use corporate resources to carry out a psychotic vendetta. My hedge fund is managing hundreds of millions in liquid capital. I have federal litigators on retainer. I have drafted filings for the SEC and the FBI. We are suing you for corporate harassment and illegal asset seizure. I will personally ensure you are bankrupt, disbarred, and thrown in federal prison for the rest of your pathetic life." Devin leaned back, clearly incredibly proud of his monologue. Caroline nodded enthusiastically beside him, glaring at the screen. Attorney David Miller shifted uncomfortably in his chair, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. Even he knew Devin was spewing nonsensical legal buzzwords, but the lawyer remained quiet, likely intimidated by Devin's aggressive performance. Cynthia seized the opening, weaponizing her maternal authority. "You are sick, Sienna," she hissed, her voice vibrating with self-righteousness. "You have completely lost your mind. I knew you were jealous of Caroline and Devin, but I never imagined this level of domestic terrorism. You ruined my milestone birthday with your hysterical outburst. You embarrassed us at the country club, and now you are destroying your own father out of spite." Gregory opened his mouth to speak, but Cynthia placed a firm, controlling hand on his knee, silencing him instantly. She was not finished. "We are willing to offer you one final chance at redemption," Cynthia declared, adjusting her blazer with an arrogant tug. "You will write a formal, public apology to me, Gregory, Devin, and Caroline. Then, you will immediately sign over whatever petty assets and corporate authority you possess to Devin. He is a financial genius. He knows how to navigate these complicated Wall Street issues. You will give him full power of attorney over your accounts, so he can fix this mess you created. If you hand over control to Devin today, we might convince him not to press federal charges." I watched the grid of faces on my screen. They were united in their delusion. They honestly believed they were intimidating me. They thought Devin was a financial titan who would crush the rebellious daughter and secure their luxurious future. They were demanding I surrender my entire empire to a man who was actively draining their bank accounts to zero. I let the silence stretch for 10 agonizing seconds. I did not break eye contact with the camera. I watched my father, Gregory, begin to sweat, realizing that my silence was not submission, but the quiet loading of a very heavy weapon. "Are you quite finished?" I asked softly, my voice laced with absolute, terrifying calm. "Because if you are completely done playing pretend, I have some actual financial documents I would like to share with the group." I did not wait for their permission. With a single click, I shared my screen, overriding their gallery view with a stark, high-resolution projection of the forensic financial dossier Bradley had compiled. The first page was a comprehensive executive summary of Devon and his fabricated empire. I watched the tiny squares on the side of my screen. Devon squinted, leaning closer to his phone camera. His aggressive scowl faltered for a fraction of a second as he recognized the official seal of federal regulatory databases. He immediately unmuted himself, his voice pitching higher than before. "Shut this down right now, Sienna," Devon demanded, pointing a shaking finger at the lens. "I do not know what fake papers you mocked up in your sad little apartment, but this is corporate slander. My lawyers will destroy you for this. You are violating federal privacy laws." I reached out and clicked the master mute button, silencing his frantic blustering. The digital room went completely quiet, save for the sound of my own steady breathing. "You do not have lawyers, Devon," I said, my voice echoing with absolute clinical precision. "You do not have a hedge fund. You do not even have a basic financial securities license. What you have is an escalating mountain of felony fraud charges waiting to bury you. Let us start with the simplest lie, shall we?" I scrolled to the second page of the dossier, bringing up a highly detailed automotive lease agreement. "Caroline, you might want to look closely at this one." I highlighted a section of the contract in bright yellow. "This is the lease agreement for that beautiful black Porsche Devon supposedly bought for you with straight cash yesterday. Notice the primary account holder. It is not Devon. It is you, Caroline. Your husband did not buy you a car. He ran your personal social security number and locked you into a predatory lease at a 22% interest rate. He maxed out your last remaining line of credit to secure the down payment. You do not own a luxury vehicle. You own a depreciating asset that is currently destroying your financial future." In the corner of my screen, I watched Caroline physically recoil. Her hands flew to her mouth as she stared at her own forged digital signature on the document. She turned to Devon, her eyes wide with panic, shouting something I could not hear through the mute function. Devon waved his hands frantically, shaking his head and mouthing rapid denials, but his polished Wall Street persona was rapidly dissolving into the panicked flailing of a cornered rat. I did not give them time to recover. I scrolled down to the next section of the dossier, displaying a web of corporate registrations. Moving on to the alleged hedge fund, I continued, my tone completely merciless. "Devon, your company is a shell corporation registered in Delaware. It holds absolutely zero legitimate market investments. You are not trading securities. You are running a textbook Ponzi scheme. You have been soliciting capital from the wealthy friends of our parents at their country club. You take money from new investors to pay fake dividends to your earlier investors, keeping the massive overflow to fund your designer suits and rented lifestyle. That is why your credit card declined at the Azure estate. Your fraudulent accounts ran dry because the scheme is collapsing. Furthermore, you are currently under active, covert investigation by the Federal Bureau of Investigation for wire fraud and theft by deception." The silence in the Zoom meeting was deafening, even with the microphones muted. Gregory had removed his glasses, rubbing his chest as if experiencing physical pain. Cynthia was frozen, her jaw unhinged, staring at the screen as the reality of her beloved son-in-law was methodically torn to shreds. Devon was no longer putting up a fight. He sat slumped in the passenger seat of the leased Porsche, staring blankly at the dashboard, his hands trembling visibly on camera. The suave, arrogant man who had mocked me in the driveway was entirely gone, replaced by a terrified criminal realizing the game was over. But I saved the absolute worst revelation for last. I maximized the final document on my screen. It was a series of bank transfer records tracking millions of dollars flowing from private accounts into offshore holding companies controlled by Devon. "Mom, Dad," I said, my voice dropping to a low, heavy register. "I need you to pay very close attention to these routing numbers. Do they look familiar to you?" I unmuted Gregory and Cynthia, allowing their audio to filter back into the meeting. Gregory leaned into his camera, squinting at the glowing numbers. His face turned the color of ash. "Those are our primary retirement accounts," Gregory whispered, his voice cracking with sheer terror. "Why do you have our account numbers?" Because I wanted to show you exactly where your money went, I stated coldly. Over the last 24 months, Devin convinced you to liquidate your entire retirement portfolio. He promised you guaranteed aggressive returns. Instead, he systematically drained every single dollar you saved to fund his Ponzi scheme. Your bank balances are at zero. You are both completely and undeniably broke today. Cynthia let out a piercing, agonizing shriek that clipped the audio feed. She grabbed Gregory by the collar, shaking him violently as she sobbed hysterically. Caroline burst into violent tears, burying her face in her hands as Devin sat paralyzed beside her, utterly destroyed. They had worshipped a phantom, a parasitic con artist who had financially slaughtered them while treating them to expensive dinners bought with their own stolen money. The supposedly perfect Harrison family was bleeding out on live camera right now, drowning hopelessly in a massive sea of their own catastrophic arrogance. And my presentation was not entirely finished just yet. "I am not done," I announced, my voice slicing through their panic. "Look back at the screen. It is time to clear up that mystery permanently." Cynthia looked up, trembling violently. "Sienna, please help us," she sobbed. "We have nothing left in this world because Devin stole everything. You have corporate connections. Save us from this nightmare." "I do not need connections to save you, Mother," I replied coldly, staring into the camera. "I am the connection." A notarized commercial property deed filled the entire shared screen. The header displayed the Azure estate in bold letters. Gregory leaned close to his camera, scanning the legal text. "Read the name of the sole proprietor out loud, Dad." He pulled back, devoid of color. "It says Sienna Harrison," he whispered. "You own the Azure estate." "I own the Azure estate outright," I confirmed. "I bought it 2 years ago as part of a massive luxury portfolio acquisition. I own the beautiful waterfront venue where you held your flashy $50,000 party. I employ Penelope, the general manager who rightfully kicked you off the grass last night. I own the expensive champagne you drank and the marble floors you stood on when you told me I was a miserable, toxic drain on your lives." Cynthia gasped, entirely unable to process her own colossal mistake. "But you drive that old car?" she stammered, fresh tears spilling over her cheeks onto her blazer. "You live in a basic apartment, and you never wear designer labels or buy expensive jewelry like Caroline does. We thought you were struggling to pay rent, and we genuinely believed you were completely broke. You thought I was broke because you measure success by flashy, leased sports cars and fake hedge fund titles," I corrected her. "You value the cheap illusion of wealth over actual, tangible assets. I drive a reliable car because I do not need to prove my net worth to valets. I live in a secure $12 million penthouse that you never visited because you were too busy worshiping a criminal actively stealing your retirement funds." Gregory let out a groan, burying his face in his hands as his shoulders shook with ruin. "Sienna, I am so sorry," he cried, his voice muffled by his palms. "I lost my construction company today. Harrison Holdings seized everything I built, and I have absolutely nothing left to my name. If you are wealthy, please help your father. I will do whatever it takes to make this right." I switched the document on the screen one last time. It was a comprehensive 5-year ledger of anonymous corporate wire transfers. I highlighted the receiving account in bright red. It was the exact routing number of the fake pension fund. "Do you recognize this ledger, Dad?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous, lethal calm, commanding total silence. "Do you recognize the massive monthly deposits that paid your suburban mortgage and financed those lavish tropical vacations while telling everyone I was a massive failure?" Gregory stared at the ledger, his eyes widening in unadulterated horror as the final, devastating puzzle piece clicked into place in his mind. "The anonymous benefactor," he breathed out, sounding completely hollowed out and utterly defeated. "It was you. You were funding the pension." "It was me," I stated, staring directly into his terrified, bloodshot eyes. For 5 long years, I secretly pumped hundreds of thousands of dollars into your personal bank accounts to keep a roof over your head. I paid for the very lifestyle you used to openly mock me with. I protected you from your own terrible, incompetent business decisions because, despite your relentless cruelty, I still felt obligation. But last night, you permanently severed that familial obligation forever. You did not just insult me, Gregory. You physically assaulted me. I raised my hand and pointed a finger directly at the camera lens, refusing to let him look away. You grabbed my arm hard enough to leave deep, dark purple bruises on my skin. You violently marched me out of my own property in front of 100 elite people. You shoved me out the grand double doors into the cold night and told me I was a worthless disgrace. You chose to protect a volatile, lying con artist over your own flesh and blood. You made your choice, and now you get to live with the absolute destruction of your consequences. Cynthia wailed, throwing herself forward toward the laptop camera. Sienna, please. We did not know. We had no idea you owned the venue, and we had no idea you funded our lives. We would have never treated you that way if we knew you were a billionaire. That is exactly the core of the problem, Mother, I replied with merciless, surgical precision. You only treat people with basic human decency when you think they have money. You only respect financial power. Well, I have all the power now. Because of your physical assault and your public humiliation last night, I immediately terminated the blind trust funding your luxurious life. And that massive corporate entity, Harrison Holdings, the one that bought your distressed debt and foreclosed on your warehouse this morning, that is my primary holding company. Gregory let out a loud, agonizing cry, clutching his chest as he slid out of his chair and onto the floor of his living room. I own your commercial debt, Dad, I concluded, watching his total collapse with absolute zero empathy. I own your construction machinery. I own your warehouse. I own your entire corporate future. And precisely because you physically threw me out of my own house, I am officially calling in every single penny of that outstanding debt immediately. There will be no legal extensions. There will be no last-minute mercy from the bank. You physically removed your only safety net yesterday, and now you have absolutely nothing left in this world but the miserable, bankrupt mess you made. Enjoy the fall. It is over forever now. The absolute finality of my statement hung over the digital meeting space like a cold and heavy iron curtain. For a long, agonizing moment, no one on the screen moved, blinked, or spoke. The massive gravity of their total, irreversible financial ruin was finally crashing down upon them, completely crushing their arrogant delusions. I sat perfectly still at my oak dining table in Santorini, simply watching the spectacular, dramatic implosion of the Harrison family. Gregory remained crumpled on the floor of his suburban living room. The camera angle caught his shoulders heaving as he gasped for air. He was actively hyperventilating, his sweating hands desperately clutching the carpet. He had thrown away his only child capable of saving him, choosing instead to violently defend the very con artist who had just bankrupted his existence. The harsh realization that his own blind ego had cost him his entire life, work was literally suffocating him. His construction company was dead, his warehouse was padlocked, and he had absolutely no one left to blame but himself. Cynthia stared at the monitor, her face contorted in a mask of absolute horror. Her carefully constructed high society social identity had been entirely dependent on the stolen money I secretly provided for years. Now that safety net was incinerated. She slowly turned her head away from the laptop camera, directing her gaze toward the video square showing Caroline and Devon sitting in the leased Porsche. The suffocating silence suddenly shattered. "You stole everything from us," Cynthia shrieked, her voice tearing through the computer speakers with a visceral, guttural rage. Her dark eyes locked onto Devon with a level of pure, unadulterated hatred she had normally reserved only for me. "You lied to my face for 2 years. You took every single dollar of my retirement money. You promised me a guaranteed return, and you were running a filthy, illegal Ponzi scheme." Devon threw his hands up defensively, pressing himself against the leather seat. "Cynthia, listen to me," he stammered, his smooth Wall Street voice cracking into a high-pitched whine. "You have to calm down. Sienna is manipulating the narrative. She doctored those financial papers. I have offshore capital tied up in escrow. I can get the money back. I just need a little time to liquidate the assets." Liar Cynthia screamed at the top of her lungs, stepping close to her webcam so her furious face filled my entire screen. "You are a disgusting, broke, parasitic criminal. You made my credit card decline in front of my elite friends. You let me throw away my billionaire daughter so you could keep playing pretend in a rented car." Without warning, Cynthia grabbed her phone, which she was using to join the Zoom call, and bolted toward the front door. The camera feed bounced wildly as she sprinted down the driveway. I watched through the windshield of the Porsche as Cynthia marched directly up to the passenger window where Devon sat. "Open this door right now!" Cynthia roared, pounding her fists against the glass. Devon scrambled to lock the doors, his eyes wide with panic, but Caroline sitting in the driver's seat was catatonic. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. She had just realized she was legally tied to a federal criminal. The credit card debt, the leased luxury car, the impending FBI investigation. It was all falling directly on her head. Her golden child status was dead. She reached over and hit the unlock button, betraying her husband in a heartbeat to save herself. Cynthia ripped the car door open. Devon barely raised his hands before Cynthia delivered a vicious, open-handed slap across his face. The sharp crack echoed clearly through the audio feed. Devon let out a yelp, holding his cheek as Cynthia hit him again, her manicured nails scratching his neck. "You ruined my life!" Cynthia sobbed, hysterically hitting his shoulder. "I gave you everything. You are going to federal prison, and I will make sure you rot there." "Stop it!" Caroline wailed, burying her face against the steering wheel. She was sobbing uncontrollably, her chest heaving with dramatic gasps. "I am bankrupt, Mom. He put everything in my name. The car, the apartment lease, the credit cards. I owe hundreds of thousands of dollars, and I have no way to pay for any of it. My life is completely over." "It is all Sienna's fault," Devon shouted desperately, trying to deflect the physical blows. "If she had just paid the invoice last night, none of this would be happening. She set us up. No one was listening to his lies anymore. The illusion was dead. The wealthy, superior Harrison family was now just a group of broke, desperate people fighting each other in a driveway." Gregory was still on the living room floor, crying loudly as he clutched his chest. Cynthia was screaming obscenities at Devon, demanding her retirement money back. Carolyn was wailing about her ruined credit score and impending bankruptcy. I sat in my luxurious sunlit villa, sipping my sparkling water as I watched the carnage unfold on my high-definition screen. They were ripping each other to shreds, acting like feral, cornered animals turning on their own pack to survive. It was the most satisfying performance I had ever witnessed. They had finally received the exact reality they deserved. I leaned forward, bringing my face close to the camera lens. The audio from my microphone cut cleanly through their chaotic screaming. "Enjoy the consequences of your choices," I said, my voice dripping with absolute, unapologetic finality. I moved my mouse cursor to the bottom right corner of the application window. I did not wait for them to look up. I did not wait for another desperate plea or hollow apology. I clicked the red button labeled "End Meeting for All." The screen instantly went black. The screaming, crying, and fighting vanished, replaced by the beautiful, perfect silence of my Mediterranean sanctuary. The war was officially over. The war was officially over. 1 month later, I stepped out of my private elevator and walked into the grand foyer of my Chicago penthouse. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city skyline glittering against the twilight. My month in Santorini had been an absolute masterclass in rest and recovery. I had spent my days swimming in the Aegean Sea and my nights reviewing the flawless execution of my corporate strategies. Now I was back on American soil, and it was time to observe the magnificent aftermath of the demolition. I poured myself a glass of vintage Pinot Noir and settled into the plush velvet sofa in my primary living room. I picked up the silver remote and turned on the massive 85-inch flat-screen television mounted above the marble fireplace. I bypassed the streaming services and switched directly to the local evening news. I had been receiving daily briefings from Bradley and my legal team, so I knew exactly what was coming, but reading legal summaries on a tablet could never quite match the sheer entertainment value of a live television broadcast. The anchor on the screen wore a grave expression as the breaking news graphic flashed behind her in bright red letters. "Good evening, Chicago," the anchor announced. "We begin tonight with a massive federal raid in the wealthy northern suburbs. A prominent local man who claimed to be a high-profile Wall Street hedge fund manager has been taken into federal custody today." The screen cut to live helicopter footage of a sprawling suburban office park. Several black armored vehicles were parked haphazardly across the front lawn. Agents wearing tactical gear and windbreakers with FBI printed in bold yellow letters were carrying dozens of cardboard boxes out of the building. The camera zoomed in just as the front doors opened. There he was. Devin emerged from the glass doors with his hands cuffed tightly behind his back. He was not wearing his signature pinstripe suit and designer loafers. He wore a wrinkled gray shirt and sweatpants, looking disheveled, panicked, and incredibly small. Two federal agents flanked him, gripping his arms and marching him aggressively toward a waiting transport vehicle. Devin ducked his head, trying to hide his face from the swarm of local reporters shouting questions from behind a police barricade. But the camera captured his absolute humiliation in stunning high definition. He looked directly into the lens for a fraction of a second, and the absolute terror in his eyes was magnificent. "Authorities have identified the suspect as Devin Washington." The anchor continued, her voice serving as the perfect narrator for his destruction. "According to the federal indictment unsealed this afternoon, Washington was operating a highly sophisticated Ponzi scheme. Investigators allege he defrauded dozens of local investors out of an estimated $12 million. Sources close to the investigation indicate that Washington targeted elite members of local country clubs, promising them exclusive access to high-yield commercial real estate portfolios that simply did not exist. He is currently facing multiple counts of wire fraud, mail fraud, and money laundering. If convicted on all charges, federal prosecutors state he could face up to 20 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary." I took a slow, deeply satisfying sip of my wine. Devin was completely finished. The federal government had an airtight case backed by an insurmountable mountain of financial evidence. He would not be negotiating any plea deals to avoid prison time. He was going to spend the next 2 decades sitting in a concrete cell stripped of his fake watches and his stolen luxury. But the true tragedy of the broadcast was not Devin. It was the collateral damage he left in his wake. The news report shifted to an interview with a legal analyst detailing the financial fallout for the family of the accused. The analyst explained that because Devin had systematically placed all major physical assets and credit lines in the name of his spouse to avoid federal asset tracing, his wife was now legally tethered to his catastrophic debt. That wife was Caroline. The golden child who had mocked my practical car and laughed at my minimal jewelry was now drowning in a financial abyss so deep she would never climb out. Bradley had sent me the comprehensive bankruptcy filings earlier that afternoon, so I knew the precise, agonizing details of her new reality. The leased Porsche had been aggressively repossessed in the middle of the night, leaving her stranded. The landlord of their luxury high-rise apartment had executed a rapid eviction, leaving Caroline essentially homeless. Every single credit card associated with her Social Security number was maxed out and completely frozen. She owed hundreds of thousands of dollars to furious creditors who were relentlessly hounding her phone. The bankruptcy court had formally seized all her remaining minor assets, leaving her with absolutely nothing. Caroline was forced to beg for a minimum wage job just to feed herself. She was currently working as a cashier at a local discount grocery store on the outskirts of the city. I pictured her standing behind a cash register, wearing a cheap polyester uniform, scanning canned goods for loose change. The sister who demanded I bow down and thank her husband for breathing the same air was now asking customers if they wanted paper or plastic bags. Every ounce of her former golden child arrogance had been brutally stripped away. She could no longer hide behind the fake success of a fraudulent husband. She was a publicly disgraced bankrupt grocery store clerk carrying the immense shame of a federal criminal investigation. The high society friends she so desperately tried to impress had entirely blocked her number. She was a total outcast, isolated, humiliated, and completely broken. I turned off the television, leaving the room in quiet darkness. The first phase of karma was absolutely perfect. It was a truly beautiful thing to witness their total and undeniable collapse tonight. It was a truly beautiful thing to witness their total and undeniable collapse tonight. The second phase of my retribution focused entirely on the architects of my childhood misery. Early the next morning, I received a comprehensive legal briefing from Victor detailing the absolute finality of Gregory and his construction materials company. The liquidation was not just a financial transaction, it was a surgical dismantling of his entire professional identity. Harrison Holdings, my primary corporate entity, executed the commercial foreclosure with ruthless efficiency. Federal marshals had permanently padlocked the heavy iron gates of his massive warehouse facility. Every single piece of heavy machinery, every transport truck, and every pallet of inventory was seized and auctioned off at a fraction of its market value to satisfy the outstanding debt obligations. Gregory was forced to stand on the sidewalk outside the chain-link fence and watch as rival contractors purchased his lifework for pennies on the dollar. He had spent decades prioritizing his ego and maintaining the illusion of a wealthy business magnate. He sacrificed his relationship with his only competent daughter to defend a criminal who ultimately bankrupted him. Now Gregory possessed absolutely nothing. He was a 58-year-old man with a liquidated company, a mountain of secondary liabilities, and zero professional credibility in the Chicago construction market. No bank would ever lend to him again. No supplier would ever extend him credit. His corporate legacy was permanently reduced to a pile of legal foreclosure documents sitting in my corporate archives. The business destruction was merely the opening act of their suffering. Without the massive monthly cash injections from my anonymous blind trust, Gregory and Cynthia instantly defaulted on the primary mortgage of their sprawling suburban mansion. They lived, completely beyond their means, for years financing their lifestyle with my secret capital. The banking institution moved swiftly, issuing a formal notice of eviction. My parents were stripped of the 6-bedroom estate they used to host extravagant holiday parties and judge their less affluent relatives. The bank seized the property, forcing them to pack their remaining personal belongings into rented cardboard boxes. The luxury vehicles in their driveway had already been repossessed. They were forced to rent a moving truck themselves, struggling to load their heavy designer furniture because they could no longer afford to hire professional movers. They relocated to a tiny run-down 2-bedroom apartment on the far edge of the city limits. The building featured peeling paint and flickering hallway lights. It was a staggering, brutal downgrade. Cynthia had to cram her expensive designer wardrobe into a single cramped closet. The sprawling chef kitchen she loved to show off was replaced by a stained linoleum countertop and a noisy, aging refrigerator. They were suddenly living the exact impoverished reality they had mocked me for supposedly enduring. For Cynthia, the loss of the physical house was devastating, but the total obliteration of her elite social status was a lethal wound. She had spent her entire adult life clawing her way into the highest echelons of local high society. She worshipped the exclusive country club dynamic, treating her wealthy friends with far more respect and loyalty than she ever afforded her own flesh and blood. But high society is a ruthless, unforgiving ecosystem. The news of Devon being arrested for operating a massive Ponzi scheme had spread through the country club like wildfire. Many supposed best friends had lost significant capital by investing in his fraudulent hedge fund. Furthermore, the elite guests who attended her 55th birthday party at the Azure Estate had witnessed her profound public humiliation firsthand. They saw the fraudulent credit card decline. They watched security march her out onto the lawn. The toxic gossip completely consumed her reputation. When Cynthia attempted to call her closest friends seeking sympathy or a temporary loan, her calls were universally ignored. When she desperately showed up at the country club gates, the security personnel informed her that her membership had been formally revoked due to unpaid dues and moral turpitude. She was blacklisted from the community she valued more than her daughter. The women she used to drink champagne with now crossed the street to avoid making eye contact with her. She was a total social pariah, carrying the infectious stain of financial fraud and public disgrace. The psychological toll of this isolation shattered her. Gregory spent his days sitting in the cramped, dim living room of their cheap apartment, staring blankly at the peeling wallpaper, unable to comprehend how his empire evaporated overnight. He was forced to take a minimum-wage job as a night-shift security guard at a local distribution center just to pay for their basic groceries and electricity. The physical labor exhausted him, leaving him with chronic back pain and zero dignity. He spent his entire shift patrolling the cold perimeter of a warehouse, completely identical to the one he used to own. Cynthia spent her time crying on a stained sofa, mourning the loss of her wealthy friends and her stolen prestige. She obsessively checked her phone, hoping anyone from the country club would reach out and offer her a lifeline, but her inbox remained completely empty. She was forced to pawn her remaining designer jewelry piece by piece just to afford her daily expenses, watching her cherished collection vanish into the hands of local pawnbrokers. They were trapped together in a suffocating, miserable existence of their own making. They had traded a loving, loyal daughter for a golden child who married a federal criminal. They had gambled their entire future on a glossy fake illusion and lost everything. I watched surveillance reports and financial updates with a profound sense of closure. I felt zero pity for them shivering in that apartment. They were finally paying the steep, uncompromising price for 33 years of relentless emotional abuse and staggering arrogance. The final karma was exact, absolute, and beautiful. 2 months after the spectacular collapse of their fake empire, I walked out of the soaring glass lobby of Harrison Holdings. The corporate headquarters was a monument to my silent grind, a towering skyscraper in the heart of downtown Chicago. The crisp autumn wind swept across the bustling financial district as my lead security agent Carter held open the heavy glass door. I wore a custom-tailored charcoal suit, holding a leather briefcase that contained the quarterly earnings reports. My chauffeur was waiting at the curb with the engine of my black sedan quietly humming. The evening rush hour traffic crawled along the avenue, but I felt completely insulated from the chaos. I stepped onto the immaculate concrete sidewalk, adjusting my collar. I was a woman who possessed absolute control over her environment. But the universe has a funny way of testing your peace. As I took my second step toward the waiting vehicle, a sudden frantic movement caught my eye from the edge of the pedestrian crosswalk. A woman stepped out from behind a concrete pillar, blocking my direct path to the car. My security agent, Carter, immediately stepped forward, raising his arm to intercept the unexpected threat, but I held up my hand, signaling him to stop. I recognized the desperate, trembling figure standing on the sidewalk. It was my mother, Cynthia. The physical transformation she had undergone in just a few short months was genuinely staggering. The woman who had stood at the base of the staircase at the Azure Estate, dripping in diamonds and mocking my simple dress, was entirely gone. In her place stood a broken, disheveled shell of a human being. Her previously flawless blonde hair was dull and unwashed, showing an inch of stark gray roots. She wore a faded beige trench coat that looked completely out of place in the wealthy financial district. Her face was gaunt, deeply lined with exhaustion and the bitter reality of sudden poverty. She clutched a scuffed canvas tote bag possessing none of the luxury designer labels she used to parade around the country club. She looked small, pathetic, and stripped of every single ounce of her former high society arrogance. Cynthia stared at me, her eyes wide and red-rimmed, taking in the reality of my tailored suit, my armed security guard, and the massive corporate tower bearing our shared last name. Her chin began to tremble. The performative tears materialized instantly, a survival mechanism she had honed over decades of narcissistic manipulation. Sienna, she gasped, her voice cracking with a manufactured profound sorrow. Oh, my beautiful Sienna, I have been waiting out here for hours, hoping to catch a glimpse of you. She took a hesitant step forward, wiping a tear from her cheek with a shaking hand. You look so incredibly successful. We are family, Sienna. I always knew you were destined for greatness. I stood perfectly still, letting the cold autumn wind whip around us. I did not offer a polite smile. I did not offer a greeting. I just stared at her, waiting for the inevitable pitch. She clasped her hands together in front of her chest, adopting the posture of a desperate beggar. Please, Sienna, you have to help us. We have nothing left. Devin completely destroyed our lives. He lied to us, he manipulated us into trusting him, and he stole every single penny your father and I saved for our retirement. We are living in a terrifying, tiny apartment. Your father is working night shifts at a warehouse, and his health is failing rapidly. We cannot even afford his blood pressure medication this month. We are drowning, and you are the only one who can save us. You are a billionaire. A few $1,000s a month would mean absolutely nothing to you, but it would keep your parents from dying on the street. Please find it in your heart to forgive us. Her performance was Oscar-worthy but completely hollow. She did not express a single ounce of remorse for the 33 years of emotional abuse she inflicted upon me. She did not apologize for calling me a failure or a toxic burden. She only apologized because her wallet was empty and she wanted access to my bank account. She wanted to re-establish the parasitic relationship she had enjoyed when I was funding her fake pension-blind trust. When my expression remained carved from solid ice, panic began to visibly overtake her fake sorrow. She realized the tears were failing to penetrate my armor. Cynthia lunged forward, her desperation overriding her basic common sense. She reached out with both hands, attempting to grab my right arm to physically force me to feel her fake maternal connection. It was the exact same arm my father had brutally grabbed when he violently marched me out of my own property. The muscle memory of that assault flared in my mind, but I did not flinch. Carter moved with lightning speed, stepping between us and aggressively shoving Cynthia back by her shoulders. "Do not touch her!" Carter commanded, his voice vibrating with lethal professional authority. Cynthia stumbled backward, almost losing her balance on the pavement. She looked at the security guard with sheer terror, then looked back at me, her face twisted in an ugly, desperate grimace. "Sienna, please do not let them treat your mother this way," she wailed, clutching her chest. "I am begging you on my hands and knees. We are blood. You cannot just leave us to rot in the gutter. You have a moral obligation to protect your family." I looked down at the pathetic woman weeping on the cold Chicago sidewalk. She was a master manipulator trying to play her final desperate card. She thought her tears would erase decades of cruelty. She thought the word family was a magical key that could unlock my vault of wealth. She was completely and undeniably wrong about everything today. I stood still on the concrete of the financial district, letting the cold Chicago wind swirl between us. I looked down at the woman who had birthed me, the woman who had spent 33 years meticulously dismantling my self-esteem to construct her own false pedestal. I searched my own heart for a single ounce of pity, a fraction of a daughter's natural sympathy, but the reservoir was empty. She had burned it dry long ago. Cynthia stared up at me with wide, bloodshot eyes, her chest heaving as she waited for the salvation she felt entitled to. She expected me to crumble, to suddenly remember some twisted familial duty, to reach out and pull her from the wreckage of her catastrophic choices. She banked on the empathy she systematically weaponized against me my entire life. But the woman standing before her was not the struggling girl she remembered. I was the architect of my own empire, a fortress built from the bricks she had thrown at me. I did not raise my voice. True power never has to shout. I simply looked at her, my expression devoid of any emotional transaction. I let the silence stretch, forcing her to stew in the agonizing reality of her complete powerlessness. The bustling noise of the city commuters faded into the background, leaving only the stark, undeniable truth between us. "Mom," I said, my voice dropping to a chillingly calm register. "You spent my entire life teaching me that success is the only currency that matters in this world. You taught me compassion is a weakness, and appearances are everything. You built a shrine to a con artist because he drove a leased sports car, and you threw your own daughter away because she wore a simple silk dress to your lavish party. You made your priorities incredibly clear that night at the Azure Estate." Cynthia opened her mouth to protest, a fresh wave of performative tears welling in her eyes. "But, Sienna, I was wrong. I see that now. We were blinded by Devon. We were victims, too." "You were not victims," I corrected her effortlessly, slicing through her pathetic defense. "You were willing participants. You loved the cruelty just as much as you loved the stolen money. You reveled in it. You thrived on making me feel small so you could feel massive. And now the bill has come due." I took a slow, deliberate step forward. Carter, my security agent, remained intensely vigilant at my side, but allowed me the space to deliver the final blow. I looked deep into the panicked, hollow eyes of my mother and mirrored the exact brutal words she used to dismiss my existence just months ago. "Leave now," I stated with absolute terrifying precision. "You are embarrassing me." The words struck her with the physical force of a freight train. Cynthia physically recoiled, her mouth dropping open in a silent gasp of pure devastation. She recognized the exact phrasing. She remembered the sneer she wore when she delivered those same words to me in the grand foyer of my waterfront mansion. The poetic justice of the mirrored insult entirely broke her. The last fragile remnants of her manipulative facade shattered into a million irreparable pieces on the cold pavement. She let out a wretched, guttural sob, her knees buckling slightly as the total finality of her rejection settled over her. I did not wait to watch her hit the ground. I raised my hand and gave a sharp, subtle signal to Carter. My security team immediately stepped forward, forming an impenetrable, broad-shouldered wall of dark suits between me and the weeping woman on the sidewalk. They smoothly and professionally guided her backward, ensuring she could not make another desperate lunge toward my personal space. I turned my back on her completely. I walked toward the waiting black sedan with a smooth, unbothered stride. My chauffeur held the heavy, armored door open, offering a respectful nod as I slid into the immaculate climate-controlled interior of the luxury vehicle. The door closed with a solid, satisfying thud, instantly severing the chaotic noise of the city street and the hysterical wailing of my mother. The cabin of the car was a sanctuary of rich leather and ambient lighting. I leaned back into the plush seat, letting out a slow, deep breath of pure liberation. I reached forward and opened the hidden compartment of the built-in console. I retrieved a chilled crystal flute and poured myself a generous measure of vintage champagne. The golden liquid bubbled and popped, a cheerful, vibrant celebration of my absolute victory. As the heavy sedan pulled away from the curb, smoothly merging into the flow of downtown traffic, I looked out the heavily tinted window. I caught one final fleeting glimpse of Cynthia. She was crouched on the concrete sidewalk, her head buried in her hands, her faded trench coat blending into the gray misery of the urban landscape. She was completely alone, abandoned by her wealthy friends, bankrupted by her golden son-in-law, and officially dead to her billionaire daughter. I took a slow, elegant sip of my champagne, letting the crisp, refined taste wash over my palate. I felt an overwhelming, profound sense of peace settle deeply into my bones. For years, I agonized over why I was never enough for them, constantly wondering what I needed to change to earn their basic respect. Now I understood the ultimate truth. The problem was never my ambition, my wardrobe, or my practical car. The problem was their toxic, unquenchable greed. Severing the cancerous tie to my bloodline was not a tragedy. It was the single most profitable investment I ever made. I cut away the dead weight and gained the world. The revenge was sweet, but the freedom was absolutely priceless. The story of Sienna is a powerful testament to the painful but liberating truth that sharing DNA does not automatically grant someone the right to disrespect you. For decades, she endured the relentless cruelty of a family who valued superficial status over genuine connection, measuring human worth in designer labels and fake prestige rather than character and loyalty. The most profound lesson woven throughout this dramatic saga is that your inherent value is never determined by the people who actively refuse to see it. Sienna's family built an entire toxic hierarchy based on lies, designating her as the perpetual failure to soothe their own deep-seated insecurities. Instead of internalizing their toxic narrative or screaming to prove her immense success, Sienna chose the path of silent, focused resilience. She built a massive corporate empire in the shadows, recognizing early on that she did not need to perform for an audience fundamentally committed to misunderstanding her. True power, as she masterfully demonstrated, is quiet, grounded, and entirely self-assured. Furthermore, her journey teaches us the absolute necessity of setting unapologetic boundaries. Walking away from toxic family members is often heavily stigmatized by society, but Sienna's final confrontation illustrates a different reality. Cutting off a poisonous relationship is not an act of malice. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. You cannot heal in the exact same environment that broke you, and you certainly cannot save people who are determined to destroy you just to protect their own fragile illusions. Inner peace is a priceless luxury, and sometimes securing it requires permanently closing the door on the people you once loved. If you are currently holding on to a toxic relationship that constantly drains your spirit, take that brave first step today to prioritize your own peace and walk away.